Hi, and welcome to the webinar from us at Active Language Teacher Training on how to find the best jobs teaching English in Spain, brackets, and around the world online. For those of you who are at the webinar, you'll notice that this is slightly different. Unfortunately, the recording didn't happen as promised, so I am recording it after the webinar for you to watch back, and for others of you who haven't, who weren't able to make it, the recording is available as promised. The only thing that you'll be missing out on in terms of the webinar are the questions that people ask and the interactive element, but all the main content will be there. Apparently we can blame Mercury retrograde or something like that, which brings with it, I understand, technological difficulties now and again. That's my excuse anyway. I'm sticking to it. Welcome to the second in the series of webinars about living and working in Spain as an English teacher. In the first webinar, we talked about the good, the bad, and the ugly, about working in Spain, about what makes a good and a bad school, etc., etc. That webinar is still available. If you go to our social media, on our Facebook page, Active Language Teacher Training Facebook page, you'll find it there in its entirety. Yes, and this time we're talking about how to find the best jobs in Spain. And we'll also touch on working online. And this webinar, of course, is directed mainly at people who want to live and work in Spain as English teachers. You may be in Spain already, you may be thinking about moving here. Okay, so the first question is around ease of finding work. Is it easy to find work in Spain? The simple answer is yes. There's a huge amount of demand because of the twin effects of COVID, Brexit, and then added to that insecurity by school owners. September, I believe, will be a time when there will be a huge demand for teachers in Spain. So through this webinar, we'll help you find how to find the best job for you in and around Spain. Okay, so COVID, why is COVID an issue? Well, people aren't moving around as much as they were pre-pandemic. I think a lot of people are just staying where they are to wait and see. This means that people will always move on from places in our line of work. And what it means then is that there'll be openings because people aren't moving around nearly as much as they did pre-pandemic. The second, of course, is Brexit. Brexit means that people from the UK no longer have the right to live and work in the EU. Spain has always relied on people coming from the UK to find work at the end of the summer for the coming academic year. Now that is precarious, to say the least. Really, it's legally, it's extremely complicated. We'll touch on how this can happen later on, but essentially it's a very complicated area. That coupled with an insecurity from school owners and school managers, people, because we've all suffered through the pandemic, we've all found things difficult, and right now people are nervous about offering contracts to people without knowing exactly how many students they're going to have. Come September, there's going to be lots of schools looking for lots of teachers, so it really should be a teacher's market. Question, is it easy to find work in Spain? Often it's not. This year it will be. September will be the time. Different ways to work as a teacher in Spain. I'm going to share my screen with you now to talk through this. Bear with me. The first question really to think about is, how do you want to work? How do you want things to be? We need to think about different things and then find the best way for you to move forward. What is the best job? What are the best jobs? Well, it depends on you, it depends on your circumstances. There's different ways of working. Do you want to work in physical classrooms where we can be with our students or in the online classrooms? Do we want to work full-time, part-time, or perhaps as a substitute teacher? What about private classes or starting our own business? There's pros and cons for everything. The important thing is to find the right path for you. We're going to go into these in a little more depth now. My slides are never complete. They just act as a guide through things, okay? So first of all, working in a physical classroom. There's three ways really to approach this in the Spanish context. The first is the main way, which is in the traditional language schools or academias de inglés. Here you'll be working between 4 in the afternoon till probably 10 in the evening, teaching children, teenagers, adults. This is the main way that people traditionally have worked as English teachers in Spain. All these things are shifting, of course, now with all the technological availability, but still the major employer. Most people work for some hours in language schools. Private classes are another way to work if you want to work with students face-to-face rather than online. It's always been a sector here in Spain. People do it more or less officially. I would urge you to be as official as possible in all of these things. And of course, the other thing to think about is starting your own business, whether that be a school or a different kind of business. The other thing to think about, of course, is how many hours you want to work. Is it full-time? Full-time hours are 24 hours a week. As 24 teaching hours per week. On top of that, the convenio or the set of rules say that we should be paid an extra half an hour for that hour. A lot of the time that's included within the hour and sometimes it's not. Or would you prefer to work part-time? If perhaps, depending on the situation, it might be just the thing that you're interested in. And working part-time can be really helpful for school owners as well and school managers. If you're really, one of the things we want to do when we're applying for a job is solve school managers' problems. Part-time teaching does that. It means you can be more flexible and they can be more flexible. They don't need to find all those hours for you necessarily. Substitute teaching is an interesting way to move into teaching here in Spain. There's often a problem that schools don't have enough cover teachers if someone's poorly, and then for you to provide a service where you can be a substitute teacher can be really, really helpful for people. We'll talk about how to portray this on your CV as we move through the webinar. Okay. Of course, working in a language school means having a contract, which could be a better or a worse contract. Don't forget there is all the information in the first webinar that we did in the series, which is available through our Facebook, activelanguage.net. And we talked in that about what makes a good and a bad employer. With that come good and bad contracts. The good thing about having a contract, or one good thing, there's many, is that you will be connected then automatically to the social security system here, meaning that you'd be covered for health reasons, pensions perhaps, unemployment benefit moving forward, etc., etc. If not, you should be working autónomo or as an official registered freelancer, which means you pay into the system. It starts at a small amount and builds up over quickly to for a couple of years to a flat rate of 300 euros per month. I believe that Spain is one of the most expensive places to be self-employed. As I said, there's more on that in the webinar. Let's talk a little about working online. It's not the main focus of the webinar, but again, there's three main ways to do it. You could work in an online school which gives you classes and you work for them. There's a number of schools doing that, an increasing number. One of the issues around working online is that things are changing all the time. So it can be difficult to get a handle on these things. One day a school that's great, 3 weeks later is not so good. So This is not a recommendation on my part. I have to underline that. These are just some online language schools I've heard good things about. Again, we'll look later in the webinar at how to spot the good and the bad in there. So some schools I've heard are good and people are happy working in are Magic Ears, Wales English, Palfish, Zebra, Camberley. These are all ones that I've heard good things about. Again, though, these things really vary. We'll look at how to work those things out as we move through the webinar. So the first is an online school. The second is through teachers' platforms. There's a few teachers' platforms around where you put your profile up and students come and find you. Lots of teachers are happy working in this way and get good hours through it. Within the Spanish context, there's tusclasesparticulares.com or .com, is one that's dedicated to the Spanish market. And there's another one which has a more international feel called Preply. There are lots of others that are emerging. As soon as you hear this webinar, this information will sadly be out of date. So do find out for yourself as well. But the third way, so the first, online schools, the second was the teachers' platforms, and the third is independently. Increasingly now, teachers are finding their own students by being online, by having a profile usually through social media. Could be through LinkedIn, it could be through Instagram or even Facebook. Lots of ways to go about this. This is a huge area, of course, one that we could devote several webinars to, but they're effectively the three key ways. Also now, people are mixing these ways of working. Some people prefer to work for some time online and some time in a language school. Again, being part-time in a language school can then free you up at other times when you want to take on different kinds of things. People like that mixture. You can vary your sources of income. Some people think this is a good idea. Other people prefer the stability of knowing how much they're going to be getting every month. Of course, even with a contract, your hours may change in a language school. Also, if it's your first year in Spain, you don't really know what's good and bad. And maybe in your first year, it'd be good to work in a few different places. Part-time or as a substitute teacher, these are all interesting ways to think about things. Do you need that steady income, or are you happy with a more fluctuating income? This will help you choose the right path for you. Also to think about career development possibilities. Are there opportunities? Yeah, traditionally people will start with the Trinity Cert TESOL as their first qualification, or the Cambridge equivalent CELTA, and then move on several years later, usually 2 or 3 years later as a minimum, into taking the diploma. The diploma is the Trinity DIP TESOL or the Cambridge version Delta. These qualifications give you access to management roles, to training positions, but perhaps more importantly than that, it moves you from being a good teacher to being a great teacher. Okay, let's move on a little bit now. There's all sorts of information and misinformation about, about getting a job in Spain. Let's see, it's time for a little bit of myth busting. So here, true or false? These are things that people often talk about in the Spanish context, in the language school. Let's have a look. What do you think? Are they true or false? We'll go through these one at a time. Native speakers only. For a start, there's lots to dislike about this. For a start, the concept of native speakers and non-native speakers is an outdated, inappropriate use of language. Native of where? For a start, who is native? What does that mean? It's really a very poor choice of words. Non-native is even worse. How can we ever describe ourselves as not being something? Anyone who wants to follow up on this or might have seen Sylvana Richardson speak on this topic is fantastic. She quite rightly says, I wouldn't describe myself as a non-woman, or as non-short, or as non-glass wearing. How can we describe ourselves as a non-native speaker? These things make no sense. We should talk about people who speak English as a first language, people who speak English as a second or a third language, and that takes some of the heat out of it. So, getting back to the question, is the Spanish market geared toward English speakers as a first language? The truth is, there is still a lot of bias in this direction, ridiculously so, inappropriately so. Just because you speak English as a first language does not make you a good teacher. So many things are involved in that. We'll talk about some of these as we move through. The important thing is that people are properly qualified, are experienced, are passionate, enthusiastic, engaged teachers. And in many ways, there's a strong argument that people who have learned the language are better teachers than people who have just learned it naturally or picked it up naturally as they've gone through life. People who've learned a language can really help people who are learning. So, native speakers only. This has been the case traditionally. Spain is changing. Even in places where they say we have native speakers, oftentimes when you look behind the curtain, lots of the teachers are not. So increasingly, this is a question of supply and demand at the end of the day, that where people need teachers, increasingly now employers are much more open to people who speak English as a second or a third language. The important thing there is to have the right qualifications. A lot of schools require a C1 or a C2 level of English, and that's worth investing in and thinking about. Okay. The most important thing is that you're a confident, competent user of English and properly qualified and properly trained. Okay. Younger teachers are preferred. Well, this is a funny one. This is something that's come up a few times. While it's true that the stereotype for a language teacher here in Spain is someone who's freshly out of university, increasingly employers are looking for more mature people. They have a certain stability about them, life experience, they know what work is. So no, some schools much prefer older, more experienced. When I say experienced in this case, I mean teachers with life experience. So are younger teachers preferred? Some schools yes, some schools no. It is not a requirement at all. You need to be well qualified, number 3. Well, this is true. Certainly, if we're talking about good jobs, you need to have the good qualifications. If jobs are less good, they're less selective, so qualifications will be less of an issue. Again, in the previous webinar, we looked at good and bad language schools. This is one of the indicators. What sort of qualifications are required by those schools? Again, a note on that, the 2 that you need to think about are the Trinity Cert TESOL or the Cambridge equivalent CELTA. These are the not only recognised within Spain, but across the world, okay? So do you need to be well qualified? No, to get a job. No, you don't need to be well qualified to get a job. You do need to be well qualified or properly qualified in order to get a good job in a good school. Number 4, experience is a must. Well, it's preferred, and understandably so, by employers. And don't forget, employers will often post adverts with a number of requirements. Don't see these things as being written in stone. This is really a wish list. Experience is always mentioned. Of course it is. People want experienced teachers, but often at the end of the day, again, it comes back to that supply and demand question. Sometimes, often, teachers with less experience or with no experience will be hired because there is that need. If you couple this with being well qualified, then it gives you a decent start. And number 5, there are too many teachers in Spain. Well, this may have been the case in the past, but is not the case As I said before, I believe there'll be a shortage of teachers in Spain, and that then is there'll be lots of opportunities for people come September. Now, let's look a little bit more closely at the traditional language schools. How can people find work in language schools? For the last 30, 40 years, language schools have started, grown, matured. The market now is big. There is practically, there's schools in every pueblo, every village, every small town. I'm talking to you here from Cadiz, which is a town of about 140,000 people, or a city, I should say, of about 140,000 people. And there are probably about 20 language schools in the city. Then if you think about Seville, a bigger city, or Madrid or Barcelona, these are huge cities. There'll be probably, I would guess, numbering into hundreds of language schools in those areas. Again, information on what's good and bad in the last webinar, do check that out. Some schools are fabulous and some schools are terrible. Most teachers who are living in Spain at some point will work in a language school, either full-time or part-time. Others do prefer to specialise in the online stuff, but let's focus on language schools now. Here's some top tips for top jobs. First, what is a top job? Well, the most important thing perhaps is to choose your location. As I said, there's schools everywhere. Where do you want to be? And then from there, think about how far you'd be prepared to travel for work. Is it within half an hour? Is it within 20 minutes? Is it within an hour? Depending on where you are, you'll have different sets of circumstances. So choose your location and go from there. Then do your research. Research often means a Google search. If you search for Academias de Idiomas and plus the area, then it will show all the schools in the local area. Then do investigate. Go to the school's websites, look at their social media, find out about them. You'll get a sense of their professionalism. You'll get a sense of their quality. It's not a definitive answer, of course, but you'll begin to get a sense for it. Look at reviews. What are people saying about it? Do the reviews seem genuine? When were they written? How many are there? These are all things to think about. Google can tell us a lot. Timing. Yes, number 3, timing. Being the right person in the right place at the right time is so often the way in any job search. The same is true for teaching English in Spain. September, most schools will start. I believe the earliest I've heard of schools starting. Most schools follow the academic year, don't forget. The earliest I've heard is sort of the 10th of September. Some schools start as late as the 1st of October. If you are here in place around the beginning of September, hit the ground running, you can be in the right place at the right time. And the last thing in this first section is be professional. Wherever you are, however you present yourself, be professional. School owners and managers have complained to me in the past about teachers who turn up with their CV tucked under their arm, wearing flip-flops, shorts, and a little vest top thing. Be professional. You are presenting yourself, even if it's just to drop off your CV. You never know who's going to be there. But even so, you should be professional in your approach. You never get a cliche here. You never get a second chance to make a first impression. So be professional in all aspects of what you do. Let's look a little bit more in depth now about your CV, about writing your CV. People think that a CV should be, some people think it should be the story of your life, that everything is detailed there. All the jobs you've had, all the experiences you've had. I don't agree. There is another school of thought that a CV is your application for a job. I believe this second one to be the case. Everything on your CV should be relevant to your application. Feel free, you should be creative. You may need to be creative. Always be honest. Think about supporting your application in any way you can. let's get into a little bit of detail here. Well, there's another question to ask before we do. Is it the story of your life? Or what's the role of it? The role is to get you an interview, to get you into an interview with someone, and from there you move on to the next phase. Okay, so on your CV, I thoroughly recommend that the first part you have a one sentence near the top of the page, probably underneath your personal information, name, where you live, etc., etc. Then include a short, personal, one sentence profile. It could be something like this. Well, before I tell you, actually, I think it's important to realize how people read CVs. People scan them, people read them very quickly. I've read somewhere that people spend a minute or two on a first read of a CV. So really what you want to do is collect the ticks from people. From the people in their heads. They may be with a piece of paper physically ticking, or they may be ticking it off a mental checklist. But what you want to do is hit those things early in order to encourage the person to continue reading, and then in order for them to feel comfortable with you. So say who you are and what you want. It could read something like this. A Trinity Cert TESOL qualified, experienced and passionate ELT teacher looking for a part-time, full-time, part-time or cover work in Cadiz. I think it's really important to get a place in there. And as you can see here, then you can change you can change that for every job that you apply to. If you apply for a job in Seville, in Valencia, Madrid, in a village, then change the name of that place. This is where you're looking for a job, rather than just anywhere. It focuses the mind of the person reading it. I'm in Seville, I'm in Cadiz. I read that you're looking for a job in Cadiz, that's a tick. I get a tick from the qualification, a tick with experience, a tick with passionate. If you don't have experience, choose something else. You could say you're a Trinity Cert TESOL qualified, enthusiastic and passionate teacher, for example. Okay, there's all sorts of different ways to think about it. And here you can see I've addressed that issue of the full-time, part-time and cover teacher. Here you're making yourself extremely helpful to the school manager, to the director of studies. I think it's a really good idea to tailor your CV to each application. Think about the place, the students, the style, and look at their website. We talked about that before. So do tailor your CV to highlight things, to play back to people what they're saying they're looking for as well. Get into specifics. I don't want to know, well, I do want to know that you've taught children, but I want to know what ages they were. I want to know how many people there were in the group, how long you did it for, what books you used. And what about exams? What experience have you got with exams? Have you prepared students for exams? In the case that you haven't, again, not a problem. You just need to show an awareness. Really, don't forget, people scan things, and if there's the words exam, so if you say you're aware of these exams that people might be taking, then again, that's creating that awareness in the reader's mind, and he or she is much more likely to have a second read of your CV. Okay, use everything you've got to support your application. If you don't have direct ELT experience, think about the experience you do have. You must include references as well. So do that. Your most recent employer is standard. Any other references are also useful as well. But use everything you've got to support your application. If you don't have experience in the classroom yet, then perhaps, what other training or teaching roles have you had? When have you worked with children? Have you run summer camps? Have you been a babysitter? Did you grow up in a big family surrounded by little cousins and you were in charge of looking after them? All these things create a familiarity and create confidence in you. There's these questions as well about things. Should I include certain things? Date of birth, I was asked recently, should I include that? No need to. referring back to the younger teacher stuff earlier. What about photos? In Spain, it's standard practice to include your date of birth and a photo. Doesn't mean you need to. If I was applying for a job, I don't think I'd include either of those. Not because I'm hideously ugly necessarily, but I don't think it's relevant to the job application. I was talking to an older lady the other day who's a qualified teacher, and she was feeling insecure about her age. Now, it wasn't through my recommendation, I hasten to add, but where she got to, which I think is an interesting place, is that she decided not to include her date of birth on her CV, but she did feel like she like a truthful photo of herself would be a good thing to support her application. So, you know, a date, how old we are is just a date. There's all sorts of other things to think about. Okay, so that's number 5, getting your CV right. Crikey, that was a big one. When then you need to send your CV and your covering letter, expect not to hear anything back. In a lot of schools, the manager or the owner does all sorts of different jobs. There's lots and lots of small schools in Spain. Okay, so it may well be that you're applying to a school that just has a few teachers, and the manager or indeed the owner might be teaching classes and talking to parents and students. They might be involved in all sorts of different elements of the job and be so busy. They might even be cleaning the toilets as well. You know, these are very busy people who don't have time, unfortunately, to reply to every email. What I always say to people is, you need to develop quite a thick skin. If you don't hear it, doesn't mean people aren't interested. It might well just mean that it's the wrong time for them. We're going to come back to this idea when we talk about things being top of mind, about what that means, about you being at the top of the pile. Always be professional and friendly and understanding. Someone's wise said that you need to treat finding a job like a full-time job. Apply yourself to it. Be professional. Make a note of all applications that you make. Start an Excel sheet. Who's the person you talk to? When was the last contact? What have you sent them? Where are you up to with this application? Any other notes you think relevant? Do say in a covering letter, I understand this may be a very busy time for you. Showing understanding, tick. And I'll send you my CV and another email again in 3 weeks' time, 2 weeks' time, whatever. And do keep a track of all of these things, okay? That way that you're clear with it all and you know what's happening there. And the next thing is to move on to interviews. Prepare for interviews. Again, be professional. Think about your appearance. Take a copy of your CV. Ask questions in an interview. Again, not too many. More information on that, on what questions to ask at interview, can be found in the first webinar that we did as well. Often people who are interviewing you aren't very good at interviewing. They're not trained human resources people. They're not trained interviewers. They're people who have found themselves in a management position, recruiting teachers. They may not be very good at it either. So be kind to them, be patient with them, and hopefully it becomes a warm, professional, symbiotic relationship. Okay. So yes, be patient, I think, is the other thing. As I said, we are predicting a teacher's market in September. If you're here at the beginning of September in the place you want to be, you've maybe sent out your CV already to a few schools, you've set things up, that's where you want to be, absolutely, come September. I think it's interesting as well to think about how this responds to the online situation. Online, if we're working online, all of these things apply as well. The delivery will be different. Of course, we need to continue to present ourselves in as professional way as possible. The online market is an evolving, growing, changing market. It's changing all the time. It moves with flows, with different things going on in different countries at different times. We're working internationally often. So people may be living in Spain and working online wherever in the world. The biggest market globally is still China. And what we saw there, for example, during COVID, and as that unfolded, there was a huge peak in demand when they couldn't get enough teachers to supply the demand for the online teaching. That went on and on and on for a little while, and then suddenly it was like they turned off the tap as soon as the kids went back to school. The market dropped dramatically. So at that point, lots of teachers had cuts in hours, etc., etc. So this is where I was talking about the flexibility before the stability when you're working online. How can you tell if a school is dodgy, an online school? It's difficult. Again, it's about common sense. I was speaking to someone about internet security recently, and he said, we instinctively know if something is dodgy or something doesn't feel right if we're in a situation, if we're walking down the street, or if we're in a bar or a pub or whatever it might be. We instinctively know that. It's about having that sense working online as well. One thing to think about, if it looks too good to be true, it probably is, okay? EFL is not well paid. Any job that looks like it's extremely well paid is probably something to ask some questions about, for sure. It may well be genuine, but it may well not be. So do be careful with that. Do your research. Check into companies. Find out about them. How long have they been going? What do other people say about them? There's all sorts of groups online. For example, if you were to search for online teachers or online teaching, or online English teaching in Facebook, you'll find lots of different groups. Most of the groups are really nice, really friendly. Ask questions on there. Find out what's going on. Oh, also, when we're talking about this, you need to know that oftentimes for when people are to recruit, schools use teachers who are working for them to recruit for them. What this means is that you may well see job adverts saying, I work for this company, it's fantastic, my life's wonderful, I'm living the dream. Be aware that these people are probably being paid a referral to those schools, by those schools, okay, to recruit teachers. At the same time, I must add that there are other people who do this recruiting for schools who are really helpful and really supportive and really professional about it. Again, just be careful, just be aware of these things, okay? And I should add here as well, it sounds terrible, but what I've said so far, but lots of teachers, colleagues of mine included, are extremely happy working online. They're doing it in all sorts of different ways and making a good living out of it and enjoying it greatly. It takes time to establish yourself in the right place for you, in the right environment for you. You establish yourself, you build a reputation, whether that's in an online school, a platform, or building your own student base from scratch. It takes time to establish yourself. These things do not happen instantly and do not happen overnight. Of course, one of the big pluses around working online is the flexibility. All sorts of different flexibility about availability, about where you work and how you work, etc., etc. Lots of people are working in Spain and working online internationally. Okay. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen for a moment. Beg your pardon. Okay. This time in the webinar, we invited people to ask questions, and all sorts of interesting questions around about details around these things. Of course, anybody can contact me. I will pop my email address here, and you can contact me directly if you have any questions that you'd like answering. Okay, now you can see my email address, simon@activelanguage.net. Feel free to drop me a line. Okay, I'm going to go back to showing my screen now and move on a little. Okay, that's the last shot we looked at. Okay, now we've talked about being properly qualified. What does that mean? There's all sorts of different ways of getting qualified. We're all very aware of that. You can pay very little for a course, or you can pay a large amount of money. We run the Trinity Cert TESOL course here in Cadiz, and I think it's about making those professional choices. The title of this webinar is How to Get the Best Jobs. Well, the first way is to be properly qualified, to make those professional choices. We've talked about the Trinity Cert TESOL as we move through the webinar. There's also the CELTA, which is the Cambridge version. We run the Trinity Cert TESOL here. What's good about it? Well, it's known and trusted by employers nationally, throughout Spain. People know it. When you've got that, it's like a seal of approval. It's like, yes, I know what this qualification is. I trust it. And therefore, immediately, you're creating the right impression in the employer's mind. For your sake, it's important to know that it's fully validated at Ofqual level 5 validation. Also has a long track record. Trinity is a well-established training college. It's been doing this for many, many years. Okay, you should choose a course that has a track record and includes career support as well. Essential, important. And the last thing is teaching practice. Teaching practice is so important on a teaching course. Any TEFL course that you might look at that does not involve teaching practice, you should be extremely skeptical of. It has, someone once said to me, and I think this is absolutely true, that you wouldn't learn to drive a car online. You wouldn't learn to drive a car without sitting behind the wheel. The same is true of teaching. Whether it's in an online classroom or a bricks and mortar classroom, teaching practice is an essential part of any teacher training qualification. Through it, you will gain knowledge. Even if for people who've been teaching for a long time, you will gain huge amounts of knowledge through the course. You'll gain confidence. You'll know what you're doing and why you're doing it. And teaching practice, a note on that, should not be, again, other courses that aren't so well thought of. Yes, we include teaching practice, they say. Yes, and you end up teaching peers, other people, other trainees on the course, rather than teaching real students. Make sure teaching practice is with real students in real learning situations. Make sure as well that teaching is guided by a professional tutor, a well-qualified professional tutor. Make sure they are assessed, and that all adds into the qualification. So it should be the heart of any teacher training course worth its salt. And as I think I've said a couple of times, we run the Trinity Cert TESOL here. You can do it 100% online or classroom-based here in Cadiz. The course runs over 5 or 11 weeks. The tutors here are expert, passionate tutors. We've been at it since 2005, so we know exactly what we're doing. The next courses are coming up soon on June the 14th and June the 26th. And you should apply now for those courses. They are filling up through activelanguage.net. Excuse me. If you'd like to contact us, well, you've got my email address. There's also the website to look at, activelanguage.net, and you can contact us by the generic email address, which is training@activelanguage.net. Our website is there as well, and please do follow us and keep abreast of all the information on our various social media platforms. They're sort of in order of how much we use them at the moment. Facebook is probably the best place to find us with the most stuff. On all of them, we are Active Language Teacher Training, and feel free to get in contact with me. Just to wind these things up, just to wind this up, just to finish off, just want to say that teaching English in Spain is a wonderful thing to do. I've been doing it for crikey, over 20 years now. I love it. It's not made me wealthy, but it's provided a steady, regular supply of the required income. It's more importantly, perhaps not more importantly, equally as importantly, allowed me to work and enjoy my work. Being in the classroom, working with people, gets us to meet people, and teaching English is a great way to be part of the community. If I can help in any other way at all, I will do. Feel free to be in touch. I've been helped by lots of other people through my career, and I look forward to helping you too soon. And of course, hope to see you, if you're not already properly qualified, hope to see you on a training course with us soon. I look forward to seeing you, and I will stop that now. Bye-bye.